Ancient DNA revealed a disease that still has no cure today. This should not exist, yet it does. A disease we consider modern, linked to stress, environment, and recent human behavior, has been found hidden inside the DNA of people who lived thousands of years ago, long before cities, pollution, or industrial life ever existed. We assumed it was a consequence of how we live today, something we created or accelerated. But ancient remains are telling a very different story, one that doesn't fit our expectations. The deeper scientists look, the more unsettling the pattern becomes. This disease was already there, quietly moving through human populations, unchanged across time. And if it has survived every era of human history without a cure, it forces a question that is far more difficult than it first appears. Are we trying to eliminate something that has always been part of us? The discovery itself began quietly, almost accidentally. A team of researchers working on ancient human remains, fragments of bone, preserved tissue, and teeth, weren't even searching for disease. Their goal was to reconstruct migration patterns, to understand where early populations moved and how they mixed. Ancient DNA has become one of the most powerful tools for this, allowing scientists to trace ancestry across tens of thousands of years. But buried within that genetic information, something unexpected started to appear. Certain genetic markers, patterns strongly associated with a specific disease today, kept showing up. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly, across different regions and different time periods. At first, the assumption was simple: contamination. Modern DNA can easily interfere with ancient samples, especially when dealing with fragile genetic material. The idea that a modern disease could exist in ancient remains seemed unlikely, almost impossible. So the samples were tested again and again, under stricter conditions. Independent laboratories repeated the analysis. The results didn't change. The same genetic signatures were present, embedded deep within the ancient genome, far beyond the reach of modern contamination. This is where the problem begins to take shape. Because the disease in question is not something minor or easily dismissed. It is one of the most studied conditions in modern medicine, a disease that affects millions of people worldwide, and one that still has no definitive cure. For years, the prevailing theory was that it emerged relatively recently, driven by changes in diet, environment, and lifespan. It made sense. As humans began to live longer and adopt new lifestyles, new diseases appeared. Or at least, that's what we thought. But the ancient DNA doesn't support that timeline. Instead, it suggests something far more complicated. The genetic foundation for this disease existed long before modern civilization. Long before agriculture, before cities, before the conditions we typically blame. This forces a difficult realization: the disease was not created by modern life. It was already there, waiting. The surface explanation tries to reconcile this contradiction. Some researchers argue that while the genetic markers existed, the disease itself may not have manifested in the same way. In other words, ancient humans carried the risk, but not necessarily the full condition. Environmental triggers, diet, stress, pollution, may still play a critical role in activating it. This explanation is comfortable, because it preserves the idea that modern life is still the primary cause. But it doesn't fully work. Because in some cases, the evidence goes beyond simple genetic predisposition. Physical signs consistent with the disease have been identified in certain remains. Subtle changes in bone structure, patterns of inflammation, even traces of molecular damage, all pointing towards something more active than just dormant risk. It suggests that the disease, or at least a version of it, was already affecting people thousands of years ago. This is where the mystery deepens. If the disease existed in ancient populations, then why has it persisted for so long? Evolution tends to eliminate harmful traits over time, especially those that significantly reduce survival or reproduction. A disease with no cure, one that weakens the body and shortens lifespan, should have been gradually removed from the gene pool. And yet, it wasn't. The same genetic patterns are still here, still widespread, still affecting millions. One possible explanation lies in the concept of genetic trade-offs. Certain genes that increase the risk of disease today may have provided advantages in the past. For example, a gene that strengthens the immune system might also increase inflammation, leading to chronic conditions later in life. In a world filled with infections and limited medical care, a stronger immune response could mean the difference between life and death. The long-term consequences would have mattered less if people didn't live long enough to experience them. This idea is supported by some researchers who believe the disease may be a side effect of adaptations that once helped us survive. But again, it doesn't explain everything. Because not all aspects of the disease can be linked to clear evolutionary benefits. Some of its mechanisms remain difficult to justify, even in ancient environments. Another theory suggests that the disease is not entirely human in origin. Instead, it may have been introduced through interactions with other species. Ancient humans lived much closer to animals than we do today, often sharing environments and even pathogens. Cross-species transmission, where diseases jump from animals to humans, has shaped much of our medical history. It's possible that this disease, or its early form, entered the human population in this way and then became embedded in our genetic structure over time. But this theory also faces challenges. The genetic markers appear too integrated, too stable, as if they've been part of the human genome for far longer than a simple transmission event would suggest. It doesn't look like an external invasion. It looks internal. Then there is a third perspective, one that is less widely accepted but increasingly difficult to ignore. Some scientists propose that what we call a disease may actually be a misinterpretation of a deeper biological process. Instead of being purely harmful, it could represent a system that has gone out of balance under modern conditions. In other words, the mechanism itself may serve a purpose, but our current environment pushes it beyond its intended limits. This idea changes the question entirely. Instead of asking how to eliminate the disease, it asks whether elimination is even possible or desirable. The breakthrough moment came when a large-scale genomic study compared ancient and modern DNA across thousands of samples. The results were consistent and striking. Not only were the genetic markers present in ancient populations, but their frequency had remained relatively stable over time. In some regions, they had even increased. This wasn't a disappearing trait. It was being maintained, possibly even selected for. This finding forced researchers to reconsider their assumptions. If evolution had not removed the genes, then they must be serving some kind of function. And if that function is still relevant today, then the disease may be more deeply tied to our biology than we want to admit. The twist is not that the disease is ancient. The twist is that it may be essential. Not in the way we typically think of something essential, but in a more complex, indirect sense. The same biological pathways involved in the disease are often linked to critical functions: immune response, cellular repair, even brain activity. Disrupting these pathways entirely could have consequences far beyond eliminating symptoms. It could affect how our bodies respond to threats, how we heal, how we function at a fundamental level. And this leads to a deeper, more unsettling twist. What if the reason we haven't found a cure is not just because the disease is difficult to treat, but because it is deeply embedded in systems we cannot easily change? Every attempt to target it may be interfering with something else, something equally important. The body is not a collection of isolated parts, it is a network. And this disease appears to sit at the center of that network, connected to processes we still don't fully understand. Imagine carrying something within you that has been passed down for thousands of years. Not an infection you caught, not a condition you developed, but a pattern written into your DNA long before you were born. It doesn't mean you will experience the disease. It doesn't mean it will define your life. But it is. They're part of a system that has survived every generation before you. At some point, the question becomes personal. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, reflective one. If this disease is part of our evolutionary story, then it is also part of us. Trying to remove it completely might be like trying to remove a thread from a fabric without unraveling the whole thing. This doesn't mean we stop searching for treatments. It doesn't mean we accept suffering as inevitable. But it does change how we think about the problem. Instead of viewing the disease as an external enemy, something to be eradicated, we may need to see it as a signal. An indication that something within our system is out of balance. And that shift in perspective could be the key to understanding not just this disease, but many others like it. Because in the end, the most important question is not when the disease began, or how long it has been with us. It is what it reveals about the nature of being human. Our bodies are not perfect systems designed for modern life. They are the result of millions of years of adaptation, compromise, and survival. Every strength comes with a cost. Every advantage carries a risk. The ancient DNA doesn't just tell us where we came from. It tells us what we carry with us. And sometimes, the things we are trying hardest to eliminate are the same things that allowed us to survive in the first place. That is the paradox at the center of this mystery. A disease with no cure, present across thousands of years, woven into the fabric of human biology. Not something that appeared suddenly, but something that has always been there, waiting to be understood. And perhaps the real answer is not hidden in the past, but in how we choose to see ourselves in the present. But the story doesn't end there. Because once scientists accepted that this disease wasn't a modern invention, the next question became far more difficult. If it has always been with us, why does it affect some people so severely today, while others carry it silently for their entire lives? The answer began to emerge not from ancient bones, but from living populations. Researchers started comparing people who develop the disease with those who don't, even when they share similar genetic markers. What they found was subtle but important. The difference wasn't just in the genes themselves, but in how those genes were being activated. Environmental pressure, diet, stress, and even microscopic organisms inside the body seem to act like switches, turning certain genetic pathways on or off. The disease, it seemed, was not a fixed condition. It was a dynamic interaction between ancient biology and modern life. This changed the direction of research completely. Instead of trying to remove the disease, scientists began focusing on regulating it, understanding the triggers that push the system out of balance. Early results have been promising, not as a cure, but as a form of control. In some cases, symptoms could be reduced significantly by targeting inflammation, adjusting microbiomes, or even altering daily behavioral patterns. But even here, the deeper mystery remains unresolved. Because no matter how much progress is made, the underlying genetic framework stays the same, unchanged, persistent, and still beyond complete control. And that brings us back to where we started. A condition we thought we understood, now revealed to be something far older, far more complex, and deeply connected to what we are as a species. It forces a quiet realization: some problems are not meant to be erased, but understood at a deeper level. If this story made you think differently about science, history, and the human body, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments.